This is a unique situation in my experience. Some people have done this before. I'm used to having feedback from a live audience, so bear with me. This is something that I have never actually attempted on a live broadcast, and it's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve for all of us. Hopefully, the equipment cooperates and everything goes well. So we're going to get started with our lesson. Obviously, I don't need to point out that we have things going in our country right now that no one has ever seen. No one alive has ever had to deal with anything like this. It has brought, obviously, massive changes in a lot of sectors. My lesson today is changes and new beginnings, to just address some of my thoughts on what's happening here and how we should be viewing it. My father was born in 1927. He was 2 years old at the beginning of the Great Depression. Not too long after that came World War II. FDR was our president at that time up until his passing in 1945. A great many things happened during that period, and there was a lot of chaos and upheaval. A lot of people were out of work, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and there was a lot of fear. And people really were out of sorts. They didn't know what to think. They didn't know where to look. Some of them were leaning to their own understanding. The Bible tells us we shouldn't do that. Some of them looked to the government for leadership. Some of them looked to the church for leadership, which was good. That's where you should be looking. All of these things as they were going on were very disheartening and confusing to a lot of people. And as that became more widely known, FDR, being for the most part, good president, he was human just like any of us. He had failures, he had victories. There's some things he was very good at, maybe some things he wasn't so great at. He took the reign and said, I'm going to do the fireside chat. I don't know if you can see in your broadcast, we have a little fire going here. I admired that, even though obviously I was not born for many, many years, until many years later. My father was too. He took that reign and he took that leadership position and said that I need to step up, I need to be in front of the people. Television didn't exist at that time, so they couldn't see him like you can see me now. But he still stepped up and took that position and said, I'm going to speak to the people, I'm going to address their fear, and I'm going to tell them, as in his own words, the only thing that we had to fear was fear itself.
Yeah.
Now that might have been somewhat of an oversimplification, but it was well said, and it made a big impact. It really rippled and resounded with the people. And that was a big transitional time for the United States as well. We were becoming a technological powerhouse. Things were changing that people had never seen. Electricity was coming in and was being introduced into homes gradually, pretty much all over the country. Communications were stepping up. Technology was just ramping at a very high rate, and a lot of people were very surprised by that. They were used to an old farming, agrarian type of country, and farming was what they knew. Then here all of a sudden you have tractors and steam vehicles, and then being replaced by gasoline and diesel, and these were things that they were not ready to deal with. It was very confusing to them. It was challenging. And a lot of people, when you throw them challenges or changes, typically one of their natural reactions is fear.
Yeah.
FDR knew that. He had a pretty good finger on the pulse of what was happening, what was coming along, and how things were altering at to some people, a frighteningly accelerated pace. And he decided to deal with it. So let's talk about that. a lot of people don't like to look for or embrace change. It's scary because we don't know what the end result is going to be. Sometimes it turns out to be far different than what we had anticipated. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. The word that we use, change, its root meanings or its root iterations come from Hebrew, including a couple of words, mer and shana. But Chalapha and Shana both seem to match the closest to my lesson, I believe, for today. Chalapha occurs 9 times in the Old Testament regarding the removal and replacement, swapping out of garments. The scripture tells us that our old nature, our old man, was filthy rags, dirty, nasty, crusty linen, only fit to be burnt, not even good enough to attempt to wash. But God also promised if we cast off our old rags through him, we would take up new, fresh linen, white as snow. Yeah. Isaiah 1:18 says, "Come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord.
Come on, brother.
Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. But if ye refuse and rebel, ye shall be devoured with the sword. The mouth of the Lord has spoken it." In the Greek, metabalo and metoina both basically transliterate to a changed mind. We would call that repentance. So all these are basically interchangeable for intent and basic needs. So let's look at some examples of changes. Noah's just sitting there cruising through life, doing his farming and goat herding thing. One day, God out of a cloud speaks to him, tells Noah he's going to destroy the earth because of the constant evil and wickedness. He sees nothing good. And it says that God repented himself of having created us. So one day he's a farmer. The next day, he's forced as an engineer, a carpenter, and a shipwright. Talk about a gigantic change. And God tells him it's going to rain, which he doesn't understand because nobody understood. You have to recall at this time that rain had never actually happened. This is a mist went up from the ground, which came out of all of the aquifers, all the water under the earth, and took care of watering the plants. So we get mad when we just finished washing our car, and it's all perfect and shiny, and we put that black white stuff on the tires and everything looks good. 15 minutes later, here comes your clouds, and you're like, oh man, I just got done cleaning the car. It was looking good. They never had that problem. They had no idea what he was talking about. So he's going around telling everyone that a judgment's on the way. And he was 600 years old at this time already. So you want to talk about not wanting a midlife crisis. That's where Noah was at. Genesis 6:12 reads like this, "And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee." It doesn't say a whole lot about what happened after that point, and it doesn't say a whole lot about the details. If anybody out that is listening to my broadcast today has never built a ship, just like I never have, I really wouldn't have a whole idea how I should go about doing that. And I'm pretty sure that if I was left to myself and I attempted to build a vessel the size that he was commanded, which was 450 feet long, if I recall correctly, 75 feet wide, and 50 feet high, the first time mine tried to float, it probably would crack in half. I'm going to bet, because I am not a ship engineer. So I would definitely have to imagine that Noah was scratching his head going, this is the craziest thing that I've ever heard. First, I don't even know what rain is, and God's telling me that water will fall from the sky. Then he tells me that I need to build a massive boat, the size that nobody has ever seen, and I have no idea how to do it. I'm a farmer. I don't build ships. Thankfully, it wasn't left to Noah's own device. Even though it doesn't record it here, I'm sure that God gave him detailed instructions on how every single piece was to be assembled. It wouldn't be something that he would have done randomly. God never does anything haphazardly.
Right.
We know that.
Come on, brother, preach.
So, even though it doesn't say he handed him a stack of blueprints, it might have been all in his head. That's possible too. It might have just been supernaturally imparted to him that it's like, this is how it goes. These are how the ribs go. This is how you build a keel. This is how the shiplap, the siding, has to go in so that it doesn't leak or break under stress. These are the cross members. This has to be triangulated. He wouldn't have known any of those things. God knows all those things. So he gave all of that, either written or, like I said, maybe just directly into his brain. Thankfully, he had some help. He had his sons there. Excuse me. And I definitely believe that the women were not sitting around with their feet up. If they were not actually actively involved in construction, I'm sure that they were taking care of running what was the remnant of the farm, taking care to make sure that they were fed, etc., etc. There were a lot of things that needed to be done that would have been outside the direct construction of that ship that needed to be completed. And I'm sure that they were there working on that as well. So here he has this massive task. It took him 100 years to construct this ship. Now you might think, that's an awful long time, considering that I heard in World War II they would build a Liberty ship in a couple of weeks. Yes, that's probably true. But those were built of steel, and they had an army of engineers and fabricators to put them together. It was him and his family. So even in 100 years, I would say that that's an impressive feat. And as we know the rest of the story, he did do it correctly. The ark survived for a year while it floated above the flood until it landed on Mount Ararat. And God said, go. I've given you a clean earth. Please don't repeat why I had to blow this up the first time around. Go and multiply. Now we come to another character that had a lot of changes in his life too. One of those started, he was pretty young. We're going to meet Joseph again. Genesis 37 and 22 states, and Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. His brothers didn't like him. Pretty sure you all know the story of Joseph and how he was sometimes a little bit of an arrogant snot. Got his brothers rather riled up at him from time to time, and this time around they got to the point where they actually really wanted to kill him. Reuben was trying to intervene here to prevent that. So he says, and it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren, they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. He was the only one who had one. His father liked him best. He gave him a fancy coat, and that burned them too, I'm sure. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and seal his blood? Now, look at this. They're sitting around. They're having a meal while he's chilling in the bottom of this hole. They didn't just throw him in there and run off.
Yeah.
They sat there for a period of time considering this whole matter, where they could have thrown him a rope and said, that was a really stupid thing to do. That was really mean. Let's pull him out. Come on, guys. For serious here? Nobody pulled him out. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. So he tried to broker a deal. He says, well, you know what? There is no way that I'm going to convince them to pull him out of that hole. They're so angry at this point that the only contentment they're looking for is somebody's death. That's pretty bad when your own family wants you dead.
Yeah.
Come on here.
There's a serious lack of compassion there. But yet, he was able to broker a deal, at least in part, that he wasn't killed, he was sold into slavery instead. Well, some might say that wasn't really much better,
That or die.
but it was that or die. His brethren were content. There passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. So he's now taken to Egypt to be a house slave in the house of a very powerful man, Potiphar, the captain of the guard, who would basically be an equivalence, if we looked at it, to perhaps the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or something of that nature, or perhaps the director of Secret Service or maybe Homeland Security. 39 says, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. Now he's got bigger problems. He refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wot not what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. He's in a foreign country. He's not very old. At this point, he might not even, if he were in the United States, maybe not even be old enough to vote. We don't exactly know his age, but guess 16, 17-ish, right? Figure that Potiphar, with his power, and actually that's a title, not a name, this gentleman with his power, I'm sure, had the pick of all of the women of Egypt. So, a pretty good shot that his wife was not unattractive. Here you have a guy, basically that age, raging hormone, and this woman saying, take it all, babe. And he says no. That must have been a struggle. Any of us who are past the age of teenager remember what being a teenager is like. That was not easy for him to say no. But he kept his moral ground. He kept his compass, and he said, I cannot do this evil before my employer, before my God. And it gets worse. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her house and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake to them, saying, see, he has brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us, and came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. She's basically doing the modern equivalent of calling the police and screaming rape. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled, got him out. See, he must be guilty. He ran. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me. And his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. So most of us would probably look at this and go, wow, the matter went from bad to worse. Brothers hated him. They threw him in a giant hole. Thankfully, it was an empty hole. There were no creatures down there and no water, so he didn't drown or get eaten. He got sold into slavery instead. Now he gets taken to this house somewhere that he's never been, to someone he's never met, but the favor of God continues with him. And this man, being one of the most powerful in Egypt, puts him over his entire house. If you read some of the other passages, it says that Potiphar knew really nothing about anything except pretty much what his wife was doing. Other than that, Joseph had control over his finance, over his business, over purchasing materials and supplies for his home. However, of many other servants he must have had, this was not a guy who was scraping for quarters. He was very well off. He would have had a large house. He would have had quite a bunch of servants. Joseph was in charge of this entire retinue. And here he's probably what? Maybe 18? Perhaps. What do we see from that? Did he do that on his own? He had no merits. He's basically a kid. It was the favor of God that never left him, carrying him through all these situations. Now where is he? Now he's in prison. And yet he becomes friends with the head jailer. And what does he do? He puts him over the entire prison. The head jailer's still in charge, just like Potiphar was still in charge. Joseph slides into position number 2. Because of his vast experience in running a prison? None. Favor of God. So we know the story that Joseph's there for a while. And he runs across the butler and the baker. Joseph interpreted the chief butler's dream. And he left him to sit in prison for another 2 years because neither of the guys that were supposedly his friends remembered him.
One died.
So, well, yeah. So even if you have the favor of God, it doesn't mean that things are going to go great that fast. Doesn't mean God abandoned you. It's all about timing. 41 in Genesis says, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there's none that can interpret it. I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. A lot of people are looking for peace right now.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river cows popping out of the river. Weird dream, huh?
Nice.
7 kind, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. Those are cows. And behold, 7 other came up after them, poor and ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, nasty-looking, such as I never saw in all the land for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kind ate the first 7 fat kind. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten. They were still thin, ill-favored, ugly, as at the beginning, and I awoke. Jump to 25. Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kind are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth to Pharaoh. Behold, there shall come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. For that dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God shall bring it shortly to pass. Pharaoh said unto his servant, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? This is a heathen. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And if any of you have done any history study, he put him over the entire land of Egypt. That was not a small thing. Their empire was quite large.
Quite vast.
They never conquered on the scale of Rome or the Medo-Persian Empire, but they were certainly nothing to laugh at, and their engineering was top flight. There are massive temples that are still standing thousands of years later that we would be hard pressed to duplicate, and they built them with no cranes. 49 records, Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. It was just too much. Nobody bothered to figure out what the volume was anymore. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bare unto him. Now, look at this. Asenath is the daughter of Potiphera. He worked for Potiphar. It's a title, not a name. This was the chief priest. His title would have loosely translated into the great one or the one in charge or something of that nature. That was how their titling went along, other than Pharaoh, king. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So he's forgiving his brothers and all the torment and torture that he went through. I've forgotten my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So not only is he not foolishly charging God, saying, you're a capricious, evil, little nasty being that's up there with a magnifying glass burning the legs off of ants, but you sent me to a foreign country, and I went through 3 different trials, and you put me on top in every single one. Potiphar's house and the lie of the rape, running the prison, interpreting a dream and then being left there anyway, because the people that he interpreted for were not rightfully grateful for that interpretation, although they should have. They said and promised that they would mention when they were removed from prison. However, they did not, left him behind. And yet he still says, I'm blessed in the land of my affliction. Is the story of Joseph true?
Yes.
The 12th dynasty of Egypt had 8 pharaohs that ruled for a total of approximately 195 years and ended around 1802 BC. Some scholars possibly argue for a later date, possibly around 1650, when foreign invaders, the Hyksos, also known as the Amorites, conquered and ruled the lower kingdom of Egypt for a period, including the city called On, which was mentioned. However, the Hyksos did not worship Amun-Ra. So this doesn't fit with the biblical account of Amun-Ra being the ascendant deity at the time. The time of Joseph has been researched and determined fairly conclusively to be in the reign of Pharaoh Senusret II, who reigned approximately 15 years, somewhere around 1900 BC, during a fairly peaceful time, and spent most of his effort on construction projects. So to put up food, he's going to have construction projects, isn't he? Unlike his predecessors, who were in combat more often than not. A noted biblical scholar has determined to a fair degree that he believes the name Potiphar is not a name at all, but a title. It means the one given by Amun-Ra, the sun god. If you were given by Amun-Ra, you had stature, because that was the ascendant deity. That was the god of gods, as they put it. They had a bunch. If you've ever studied that, they had one for everything, including probably tripping, kicking your foot into a curbing. They had one for just about all of them. It is also interesting to note that the city of On, which was known by the Greeks, which may be a much more familiar name, Heliopolis, was the center of the Amun-Ra cult, and that for Joseph to marry the daughter of a priest of this sect was a high honor, further cementing his position in power and esteem among the Egyptian hierarchy. Heliopolis was the center of Egyptian historical conservation and had an extensive library at the time of the Middle Kingdom. It was also historically noted as one of the 3 major storehouses or granaries of ancient Egypt, adding further credence to the account of Joseph in the time of famine. Interestingly, Heliopolis is mentioned directly or obliquely in the writings also of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, mostly referring to its later destruction, which of course biblical prophecies do always come to pass sooner or later. Let's change gears a little bit. I'm going to go to Micah, which is a very small book. 6 chapters, if I recall correctly. Not very long. And a lot of it is actually not a uplifting book. There's a lot of judgments going on in there. But we can see some things that we can take note. We can take guidance in heart. Micah 4:1 says, "But in the last days shall come to pass,
Yeah.
the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow into it. And many nations shall come, and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords to plowshares, and their spears to pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn warfare any more. They shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it." Jump into 5. "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting." Who's coming out of Bethlehem Ephratah?
Jesus.
He's giving us a preview here, isn't he? Just like Isaiah did. He's telling us, your Redeemer shall come.
Yeah.
"Therefore will he give them up until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth, and the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel." Actually, there are 7 chapters. "Therefore I will look unto the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy. When I fall, I shall arise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord shall be a light unto me." David had an observation in Psalm 23rd chapter. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Paul wrote to Corinth, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ,
He's a
he's a new creature.
Oh,
Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." And in 15, "In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality.
Yeah.
So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that's written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God which give us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." He had this to say in 13, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith,
yep,
so I could remove mountains,
that's right.
and have not charity, I am nothing. And if I bestow my goods to feed the poor, and give my body to be burnt, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity wants not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, sinks not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoice in truth. Beareth all things, believe all things, hope all things, endure all things. Charity never fails, but that whether there be prophecy, there shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three. The greatest of these is charity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never really got to listen to any of FDR's broadcasts. Obviously, I was not born then. And I'm assuming that there are probably some recordings somewhere, but I haven't played them back. But I would have to believe that if he were addressing the country and he were giving a scriptural based hope, it would have sounded something like that. I'm not saying that I approach in any fashion the level of stress that that poor man had to endure for the things that he guided our country through. But everybody's got a point where they'll crack. But then everybody also has a point where they have to find there's nothing more than faith. He told our country we had nothing to fear but fear itself. That was true then, still true now. We see these different characters, these historical figures that went through some pretty horrible traumas. Some of them fell, like Samson, Saul. They failed because they did in what they thought in their own eyes was right, instead of looking to where they should have been looking, not at their own leaning to their own understanding, looking for godly wisdom, guidance from godly counselors,
Right.
and from God himself. So as we deal with being locked in and schools, restaurants, government, public buildings, all shut down, it's probably easier right now to fall into that hole, to forget that he said all we have, to fear is fear itself. We know the one who holds the entire universe in the palm of his hand.
Amen.
It says the earth, he props his shoe on. That's a pretty big foot prop. So is there anything too big that he can't handle? Is there any mountain he can't move? Or any mountain he can't move? He created all the mountains. To him it's a pittance. So even though it may be easier to fall into the realm of fear, we need to reject that and stand on faith.
Yeah. Yes.
That's all we've got to get us through this. These are definitely weird times. None of us know what to think. None of us know what's going to come next. But there's still one that's in charge.
Jesus.
Still one that's on the throne.
Jesus.
Still one that isn't sleeping.
Jesus.
Still one that did not take vacation in Aruba.
Jesus.
Still one that listens to our petition.
Yes.
Just keep that in mind. Everything else will fall into its place. Thank you for your time.
You want to let them know what time you back?
We'll be resuming broadcasting in approximately 15 minutes. Sorry, 20 minutes. 2 o'clock. Pastor will be preaching the second half of the sermon as we usually do. For those of you who attend live. Obviously, this is not an ideal situation, but it's what we have. We'll be back to see you at 2 o'clock.
God bless you.
God bless.